right. So for this class, I have 2 yoga blocks, a yoga strat, and for the yoga strat, we'll go ahead and make a loop in it so we don't have to do it later. And you want one that will fit around your thigh. So just one leg. And then I have 2 dumbbells. They're optional. We are going to do some squatting today with the exploration of movement that we'll be using. So I have 2 dumbbells. That's optional. And then a blanket is also optional for your knees. You can go ahead and set the blocks off towards the front edge of your mat. The weights, just have them out of the way so you can grab them if you opt to use those later. You may want to have your blanket for your head at the beginning of your practice. And the belt with that loop in it can go ahead and sit off in between the blocks towards the front of your mat. And we're going to come down to our backs. So we've been exploring these somatic explorations of movement at the beginning of the practice. And I'm really kind of liking that approach. So we're going to continue that. So with your knees bent, adjust so that you feel like you're making more space for your spine, you're making more space for your pelvis. And once you feel that you have made those adjustments, go ahead and straighten the legs log to the ground. We've done this for several weeks now, so we won't spend quite as much time in this early on checking in. So just start to scan your body from your feet up your pelvis and spine. And as we've been practicing, just kind of compare one side to the other, noticing differences or asymmetries from side to side. If you like the balance beam kind of practice of imagining your spine on a balance beam and feeling which way you would be falling off as a way to kind of notice differences side to side, you can use that. And then just take a few moments to check in with your breath. Inhaling through your nose, exhaling through your nose. And other than that, just keeping the breath pretty natural. They're not trying to force it to be longer or bigger. Just kind of notice how your breath is in this natural, relaxed state. And then go ahead and bend both knees. Have your feet more or less hip distance apart, maybe a little wider, wherever you feel comfortable. And today, our focus is on the pelvis and hip kind of compartment, looking at external rotation and abduction. So we'll start this exploration of movement, letting your right leg open up towards the floor and then close back to where you started. And as you open up, you can rock onto the outer edge of your right foot, but go slow. Go slow enough that you can start to notice how the head of the femur or the top of the leg bone, that ball of the ball and socket joint, moves within the socket of your pelvis. And if there's other movements in the other side, you can allow that to happen. But for this first exploration, can you keep your awareness in just the leg bone moving in the hip socket? And do just a few more, noticing how much it moves, where you feel resistance, kind of whatever comes up in your mind. Somatic practices is mindful movement. So you are moving the body with awareness and trying to feel what's happening. Good. Bring the right leg back up. Foot remains on the floor and just stay with the feet on the floor and just check in from the side to side and just notice, like, did that create any shifts or changes? So last week we moved our hip points up towards our shoulders. We're going to move into external rotation, abduction, moving from the hip point. So the hip point is the kind of front edge of the side of your pelvis. So your pelvis has two sides. Imagine as you now move that right leg open, that you are initiating the movement by opening that side of the pelvis, almost as if you are opening the cover of a book. And explore how it feels similar and how it feels different to let the right leg open now more from the movement of the pelvis, kind of opening apart from the midline to take that leg out. And almost as if it's closing as you bring the knee back in. And try one more like that. And notice how the other side responds. And then bring the foot back to the ground. And just take a couple of moments to check in. And notice how that shows up in your body. Always checking in with the other side. We're going to try one more exploration of movement to initiate the movement of this leg, this right leg opening out towards the floor. Initiate it by wagging your tailbone. And I'm not going to tell you what direction to point your tailbone to make that happen. But if you initiated the opening of the right side of the leg moving towards the floor, what way naturally does your tailbone point? Does it point towards the left heel? Or does it point more off to the right heel? And just kind of track what you do naturally. And notice where that shows up. Notice what other parts of your body are moving to initiate movement from the tailbone wagging. And then what would it feel like to point towards the opposite ankle that you're naturally pointing towards first? So if you were pointing to the opposite heel first, can you initiate the movement by wagging the tail towards the right heel or vice versa? And again, you may notice that when you move the tailbone into it, now the spine kind of comes into play. Let it. Bring the right leg back up. Check with the knees bent. Notice side to side. And then straighten the legs long to the ground and check in with your balance beam. And notice if anything has shifted at all. And then bend both knees. We're going to go a little bit faster on the left side because we now know what we're doing. So first, we're just dropping the left leg open and back up. And again, especially for this first one, move slow enough that you can connect to how the ball of the top of your leg bone rolls in the hip socket. And notice how much the rest of the body does or does not move when we're moving from this initiation point. And then bring the feet back up, knees back up, pause, just check in. The second exploration is moving from that hip point, that bony, sticky out point above your hip crease, like you're opening a book to take the leg out and then closing the book to draw it back in. And for me, when I switch to moving from this pelvic initiation, my right hip kind of comes off the floor, whereas when I was moving more from the leg bone, I didn't feel that I had to bring the other side of the pelvis in. You may or may not feel similar, but just to kind of help you track how you feel differences, bring the legs back together, pause, check in. And then the final exploration of initiating this external rotation with abduction is wagging the tailbone. So first notice which way you wag your tailbone naturally to open the left hip. And what I notice is that on this side, I do it the opposite. I take the tailbone towards the same foot rather than the opposite heel. That for it feels more natural on this side, but I want to explore both. So I'm going to do the opposite of how I naturally am drawn towards initiating the movement from the tailbone. And I definitely don't feel as organized in my spine. This is hard for me to wag it towards the opposite heel to drop my leg open. Good. Come back to center, start both with both feet on the floor initially. Check in, notice any shifts. I definitely feel my rib cage has dropped towards the floor now. I don't feel like I'm flaring away from the floor. My spine is closer to the floor. When I go to straighten my leg, I feel that same thing. So just kind of check to see what you feel different. I also feel that my left leg is closer to the floor where my right leg typically is. Then both knees. Walk the soles of your feet together. So this is like in yoga, recline butterfly pose, and allow the knees to open. Start to press the soles of the feet together. And we're going to move the same way. So we're going to start to lift the right leg up, knee up, and then down. So we're moving first from the hip joint just a few times. Still pressing the feet together. So you definitely won't lift the knee all the way up. Just kind of notice how it feels to move. And then we're going to go straight into the pelvis opening. So as the right pelvis opens, let the left hip lift completely off the floor, as if you were going to take your right thigh to rest it on the floor, and maybe you can. And then come back to center, let the right knee roll up. Open from the pelvis, rock the left side of your pelvis off the floor so it's moving to allow the right thigh to come down. And try that a few times. And notice how the tailbone responds. Notice how where the tailbone reaches, what it does to your spine. And you might try to wag the tailbone to the opposite heel that you initially go to first. And just notice if that changes anything. I am squeezing my left glute in order to help rock all the way open to the right. Bring the feet back to the floor. This time, let the knees rest in towards each other and take your feet wide, almost mat distance apart, and just take a couple of moments to check in with what feels different side to side. So as we work on this exploration of external rotation, you may notice that you also improve your internal rotation. So the ability, you may feel like your right leg is able to rest in more than your left leg, maybe not. And then let's go to the other side. So walk the feet together. Allow the knees to open and press the soles of the feet strongly towards each other. And first, just a couple of times without rocking the pelvis. Take the leg bone up and in, and then down and out. Keep pressing the feet together. After you feel like you can separate that movement from your pelvis, then start to allow the pelvis. So opening the left side of your pelvis to drop the left leg towards the floor, squeezing the right glute. And then explore that a few times. So as you come back to center, let the left knee point up and then open the pelvis towards the floor, that book open, and squeeze the right glute to rock to the left. Can you stay connected to that left side of your pelvis opening like the book to rock? Open and bringing it back in. Check in with the feet, continue to press them together and squeeze the right glute as you rock. And then see what happens to your tailbone naturally a few times. And then try the opposite a few times. Come back to center. Walk the feet about mat distance apart. Drop the knees in towards each other. And check. Do you feel like both legs are able to roll more in to allow the knees to rest more comfortably together? And then straighten the legs long and do one more check-in towards the beginning of our practice before we start to move away from the floor. And then bend the knees. Roll to either side and come up to hands and knees. If you need the blanket for your knees, you can place it under your knees. So come into quadruped or hands and knees. And just take a couple of moments to move through cat-cow, going between flexion, rounding through your entire spine, and extension, arching your spine. And then just start to notice how the pelvis, the sockets, rotate on top of the balls of the tops of your leg bones to create this movement in the spine. Good. And then come to a neutral spine. So we're going to explore these same movements now on hands and knees. So for the first part, we're just moving the leg bone and the hip socket, right? So the hip points face down, and we're only taking the right knee out as far as the leg bone takes us, right? So we're thinking of hip point squaring down as we move the right knee out and in. Pause. And now we're going to think of that right hip point opening the book, which will stack the right side of your pelvis on top of your left. So now you're allowing the whole pelvis to open. And then start to notice what the tailbone does naturally. Does it point to your left heel? Or does it reach up toward your right heel? And then explore what it feels like to do the opposite a few times. Good. And then we're going to step the right foot outside of your right hand. Keep your left knee on the ground. Bring your right hand on top of your right knee. You can either keep your left hand on the floor or on a block. And now we're going to explore that movement by using the hand to guide the knee out, and the pelvis is staying still. So feel that leg bone move inside the hip socket, and you might try it without the hand pushing. And then what happens if you start to move the pelvis? And you can rock into the outer edge of your right foot. Notice how the whole body starts to respond when you start to lead this rotation and abduction with the pelvic initiating the movement rather than just in the hip socket. And then notice what your tailbone does naturally. Does it point towards your back left heel? Or does it point off to the right? And what would it feel like to do the opposite? It changes so much in my body when I switch the tailbone. Come back to hands and knees. Toes touch, knees wide. Send your hips back into child's pose. You can either rest your forehead on the floor, stack your arms, and rest your forehead on your hands, or a block. And shift the hips side to side. So as we shift the hips side to side, we are creating rotation in the hip joints. So kind of notice the right side compared to the left side after all that we've done. Are they different? Does one move better? And then come up to hands and knees, and we'll repeat this again on the other side. So first, move through cat-cow a couple of times. Again, checking in how the pelvis rotates over the top of the leg bones to create extension and flexion. And then find neutral. And we'll go to the left leg. So first, keep the hip points pointing straight down and just lift the leg out to the side as much as you can without the pelvis shifting to the right or opening. And then once you feel that, can you now initiate the movement by opening your book of the pelvis? And as you do this, start to notice what direction your tailbone points to naturally. Does it point towards your right heel? Or does it point towards your left heel? And then try the opposite. And then bring your left foot beside your left hand. You can have your right hand either on the block or on the floor. Use your left hand to guide just the leg bone in and out. And for me, when I do this, nothing else moves. Like my pelvis doesn't move, my chest doesn't move, my spine moves. It's all just my leg going in and out. Try to see if I can do that without using my hand to push it in and pull it in. And then now I'm going to start to open my book. And when I do that, my whole body rotates towards my knee because I'm opening the whole pelvis. I have to rock out onto the outer edge of my foot. And on this side, my tailbone naturally goes towards my right heel. And I'm rotating towards my left knee. And if I switch and I start to take it towards my left heel, it's like my whole body starts to shift forward rather than rotating open or towards the left foot. So it just kind of shifts how everything moves. And I find that interesting. Good. Come back to hands and knees and sit back into child's pose. Shift the hip side to side and just check in. Awesome. Come to hands and knees. Take your right leg straight back. Lift the right leg off the ground so the toes point straight down. With the straight leg, rotate just the leg bone. Rotate it out, so external rotation and then back in. I'm trying to keep my hip point square to the floor, and I'm trying not to lean off to the left. Good. Now we're going to start to stack by opening the whole pelvis and rotating down. And explore that a few times. The next time you open, we're going to bring the right foot down to the ground, come up into kind of a gate pose with the knee bent. Push the knee over the direction of the toe. Reach your left arm over your ear. And then bring the hand back down and come back to that starting position. And then open the hip. Bring the foot to the ground. As you lean the knee over the toe, sweep the left arm over the ear. And just play with that a few times. See if you could initiate the movement from the leg bone. See if you can initiate the movement from the opening the pelvis, the book. Maybe a combination of both. One more time down towards the floor. Stack. Come into that position. Hold. Take your right hand on top of your right thigh and twist it. Notice what direction your tailbone points naturally. Does it point to your left knee or your right heel? And then wag the tailbone. Side to side. Good. Bring the left hand back down to the floor. Right hand back down to the floor. You're going to step your right foot out beside the edge of your mat. Step your left foot back like plank. And then you're going to rotate open into a variation of side plank. Use external rotation of the leg bone and then open the hip. Both hands to the ground. Bring your right knee down. Bring your left knee down. This time, press up and back into bear pose. So knees stay bent, almost parallel to the ground. And just notice side to side hips. Release both knees to the ground or to your blanket. And let's go through the other side. So take left leg straight back. Square the hips down towards the ground. As you lift your left leg off the ground, keep the hip points where they are. Turn just the leg bone. Out and back in. I have a harder time rotating this side out. I'm just making a note of that. And then go into the pelvis, initiating the movement. So open your left side of your book to stack. Left side of your hip on top of the right side of your hip. And then the next time you stack open, come up, bring the foot to the ground, push the left knee out over the toe, reach the right arm over, and explore that transition of movement, moving from closed hip to open hip. So internal rotation as you bring the legs back down, or the hands back down. External rotation as you open. Maybe exploring what you do naturally. Do you move from your leg bone or do you move from the pelvis? And then trying the opposite. The next time you come up into the up position, stay up. Grab your leg bone or your thigh with your hands. Roll the leg bone out, move the knee over the toe as much as comfortable for you. And then try wagging your tailbone side to side. And notice if I have a harder time on this side. Switch both, bring your both hands to the ground. Square the hips towards the ground. Step your left foot out almost like it's in line with your right knee. And on the outer edge of your mat, toes pointing away from the mat. Come into plank on your right leg. And then externally rotate the leg bone and then open the pelvis to stack into a variation of side plank. So really think of opening the book and also rotating the leg bone open. Both hands come to the ground. Drop your right knee to the ground. Bring your left knee beside your right knee. Spread your palms, tuck your toes under, keep your knees bent. Lift the hips up and back, so high bear. Notice your pelvis. Notice your hips. Walk your hands towards your feet to come up to stand. All right. So we are going to continue to explore these things with some props. So we're going to stack the two blocks on top of each other. You may feel more stable if the blocks are up against the wall. So if you feel like standing on the block on one foot is going to create too much instability, like if the top block would slide off the bottom block, you can do that. We're going to take the strap and wrap it around our right. So we're going to take the blocks off to the right. Your whole foot is going to stand on the block. So you want them facing the short edge facing the long edge of your block and out a little bit, because we're going to do squat, but one of our feet is going to be up on the block, which is going to be interesting. So if you have a D ring like mine, you want to hold the D, the curved part of the D, in your right hand and step into the yoga strap. You're going to bring your foot onto the band or onto the blocks with the toes pointing out just slightly. And then you're going to tighten the band right in your hip crease. So I kind of start with it on the inner thigh so that when I pull it tight, that curved part of the D-ring is, or if you have the strap, you want the strap that you're pulling to face behind you. So you want to pull it pretty tight. And then you're going to step your other foot kind of in a sumo squat, so a wide squat. You're going to use the hand, your right hand behind your thigh, to pull the strap towards the floor. So this is going to traction that leg into external rotation. And we're going to do 8 squats. So this is a squat. And we are really trying to encourage external rotation in that right leg. It's happening in both. But what it's not is you're not leaning to the left side like this. You're trying to bend both knees. They won't bend equally because the right leg is up higher. But you're thinking that your pelvis is going straight down instead of shifting off to the left. Good. We're going to keep the strap where it is. Now we're going to bring the stack more straight. And you're going to stand right foot on the block. This left foot, you're going to balance. This left foot is going to reach back. And you're going to think, and if you want to tug the strap to help encourage that external rotation, you don't want to tug too much because you'll create imbalance, but you could have a wall off to the side. But we're doing, again, kind of this squat just in the right leg. And we're doing 8. We've probably done about 6. One more. Come off the blocks. And if you have weights, you can use weights, or you can save it to the last set. We're going to do a traditional squat. So for a traditional squat, the feet are not completely parallel, but we don't turn out the toes a lot, right? That's fine for malasana, which is kind of more of that yoga squat. But for a squat that we're doing more like the gym squat, the more you turn your toes out, you preference the feet to fall into pronation, which will create that knee valgus. So almost parallel, toes just barely wider than your heels. So we've been focusing on the right hip. If you want to use the strap to create that squat as you go down, you can. It feels a little destabilizing because the left leg is not stable, but you can. And maybe you just tug it at the bottom. Or you can bring your hands out in front and just see, can the belt being there help to make you think of the leg bones rolling out so you can go into a squat? We'll do 2 more. And just notice how your squat feels with this exploration of movement as a preference to the squat. Good. Release the strap off of your right leg. Take your feet just slightly wider than your hips. Reach your arms up and over your head. You can bend your knees or keep your legs straight and create that forward fold by rotating the pelvis on top of your leg bones. Fold, bend the knees, and then just shift the hips side to side. And notice the difference. Both knees bent, roll up. And we're going to switch the belt to the left leg now and experience those 3 things on this side as well. So the D ring, when it's on your thigh, should be pointing to the wall behind you, the curve of it. And then you're going to take it to your inner thigh so that when you pull it tight, it ends up on the top of your thigh. It's right in your hip crease. Shift the blocks off to the left side, and they're just barely pointing out. So we're creating that squat position. So now the left foot is on the block. Your right foot is out to the side. It's not way back here. You're in a squat stance, but a wide sumo squat stance. Start to tug with your left hand, the strap down, and feel how that starts to rotate the leg bone in your hip socket. And then as you squat, go straight down. And there's a tendency to want to avoid that depth of flexion in your hip, which will make you kind of lift over to the right. Think straight down. And we're doing about 8. I've done 4. So I have 4 more left. And I'm really tugging that strap towards the ground to help me feel what it feels like to rotate that leg bone open. Good. Come off of the block. Bring it more towards the center.
Nice job, Barbara and Holly, using your wall or your counter.
Yes. Balance any way we can get balance. All right, so we're going to step up on the block with our left leg. And this one's my hard leg. And I'm going to do this from a side view this time so you can see how I am kind of tilting forward and reaching the right leg back. And my tendency is this knee wants to drop in. So I'm tugging the belt back to help me go more into a squat rather than letting that knee drop in. Let's do 3 more. Nice. And then come off of the blocks. And we're going to go into our traditional squat. So you always have the option to play with how close or far apart your feet are. For some of us, it will be easier to find that external rotation with our feet further apart. So you might try exploring that this time. But regardless of how far apart the feet are, we're still looking for that almost parallel. Toes are just slightly wider than our heels. If you like the belt, you can try that a few times. But we're going to go, and I'll show you from the side again. You can go deep into a squat if you have that in your body, and maybe you don't. So maybe you try to tug the belt back to help you find that external rotation, which actually, as soon as the hips go below the knee, is more internal rotation. Let's do 2 more. When you're done, you can remove the strap, and we're done with the strap. So that first time through, we're exploring this range of motion with the leg bone initiating the movement. We've also been talking about moving things from the hip point as well. So we are going to reduce the size of, and we're only going to use 1 block. Use a yoga move here. We're going to use Warrior 2. So this time you want the short edge of your block pointing towards the short edge of your mat. Because in Warrior 2, the leg that we would call our front leg points away, points open. because we have that external rotation with abduction. So make sure you're really strong, pressing your foot into the block, because we're going to hop the left leg away. So if having your hand on a wall or a countertop helps, or you can heel toe the leg wide, we're going to bring that leg into warrior two. So the knees bent, thigh almost parallel to the floor. And we have that external rotation in the leg bone. So find that first. And then now think of opening your right pelvis, not the left, but opening the book on the left side of your right side of your pelvis. And maybe you can sink a little deeper. Push the foot down into the block. Maybe you want to bring your arms out to the side. And keep trying to open that side of the pelvis. Notice where your tailbone points naturally, and then wag it a little bit. Feel if it creates more or less space pointing one direction or the other. Decide what you like better, and then hang out again. Straighten the leg. Heel toe or hop the left leg in. And we're going to come into a squat this time with the option either for two weights in front of your shoulder line, or if you have one weight, you can hold both ends of the dumbbell, hold them at your chest. But as you go into the squat this time, not only externally rotating, but also opening the pelvis. You will want to do both sides, but you might be a little bit more aware of the right. And we'll do 8. And notice left side to right side. We've worked the right. Is it easier to find that side of your book opening a little bit more? 3 or 2 more. And you'll notice I can't really count and talk at the same time. So if you want to do a true 8, count for yourself. Good. And then place the weight down.
Can we just clarify that like opening the book means that the toes are a little more outward?
Nope.
Because that, no?
Nope. No, thanks for asking that. Right. So one of the things that I see in squats so frequently is that people will turn their toes way out. And when we turn our toes out, when we go low, we have no other choice but to collapse the arches towards the floor. Notice what happens to my knees when that happens, right? They valgus in. If I have closer to a parallel stance, I have to find the rotation in my hip joint, and the pelvis does open, right? And it's very subtle, but you may have felt, so try that a few times, Lisa, without taking the toes wide. You can take your feet wider.
I just feel like I want to compensate with the knee, or I want to
exactly. You
okay.
want your knees. So what tends to happen in a squat is this, right? The knees drop in, which basically is a symptom of either lack of external rotation or internal rotation. So that's what we're working on. That's why we're kind of pairing it with the squat, is because when people don't have that, their knees drop in, and a lot of times they'll kind of lift to one side, the side that they don't have the rotation in as much. Or maybe it's the opposite. I can't think of that. Did that make sense, Lisa? It's a good question. And
yes,
kind
it
of
does.
the whole
Thank you.
reason we're doing this class. Say that again.
It did. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's go through that on the other side. So take your block off to the left side of your mat. Short end points towards short end. Step your left foot on the block. And then heel toe your right leg until you're in a position where you can be challenged, but not too challenged, enough that you can work what's going on in this left hip. So first think of creating like we have the strap and we're pulling the strap down. So we're creating the rotation in the hip joint. And then the set of your pelvis just the left. And it's really subtle. I'm like just imagining that I'm opening that hip point a little to face towards my left knee. And then if you like, you can bring your arms out or not. I don't really care. But wag your tail. And notice as you wag your tail, is there a position that feels a little bit more open to you? And then stay in that position. And mine's different on each side. I like, this is my right side. I like my tailbone pointing towards my right heel on this side. And when I'm on the other way, I like it pointing towards the back heel. Good. To come out of it, straighten the left leg and heel toe the right leg in to come off the block. And then we're going to try that squat again, either weighted or not weighted. It doesn't matter. Play with how far your feet are apart. Because we're always told that, you know, they need to be this far apart. They don't. We all have different hips. And we want to find the one that we can access the most range of motion in. So sometimes instead of turning your toes out, just take your feet wider and try your 8 squats. See if you can find the leg bones rolling in the hip sockets. And then as you go lower, feel the hip points pull apart. Do your 8. And just notice how your squat is shaping up. I'm going to watch a little bit. Awesome. They look great. When you're done with your 8, you're done with your 8. You can put the weight down if you're using a weight.
So say it again. Why? What does that mean if it being in a wider stance is better? That means my internal rotation is not as strong, or my hip
I would
rotation?
have to look at your hip. Everybody's the shape of the head of your femur. Everyone's shape is different. And this, so if this is the ball of the head of your femur, how this angle is going to be different in everybody's body.
Okay, so it's
And
not a
then
one
this
size
would
fits
be-
all kind of thing. Okay.
It's not.
Okay.
And this is the neck of the head of the femur. Some are really short and some are really long, right? So you can't change bone anatomy. So, you know, for the longest time, people have been told you should always squat with your feet, you know, slightly wider than your hips, da 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 da. That doesn't make sense for everyone because everybody's joints are going to be different. So you want to work with where you can actually try to get depth, right? And I used to go with that really narrow stance. And I can get depth with my narrow stance, but if I load it, it hurts my back. So I just take my feet a little bit wider. And it doesn't mean that you have to have one or the other because your anatomy is completely different than my anatomy and everybody else here. So just play with it, but play with how far your feet are apart rather than taking your toes wider. All right. Come into downward facing dog. So we do 3-legged dog in yoga quite frequently. Let's play with that. So shift your weight. And if being on downward facing dog is not where you want to be, you can go back to what we did earlier with the hands and knees and play with that again. But this time we're going to play with bent knees. So lift your right leg up and back. Turn just the leg bone in and out. And then stack and close by opening your book And then bend the knee and let the tailbone reach towards the top knee and then take it down towards the foot on the ground. And just notice how that shows up different. And then bring your right knee to your right wrist. So pigeon. So right knee behind your right wrist. Right ankle towards your left wrist. You can have your elbows on block. You can have your hands on the ground. You can have your elbows on the ground, but move your mind into your right hip joint. Try rotating that leg bone open a little bit more. See how that shifts it. And then think of rotating the pelvis open a little bit more. So open the book. And if these subtle cues are not working, like that's okay. We're still moving, we're still playing, you're still feeling things, you're still working with external rotation and abduction. But if you can find those subtle little tweaks, notice how that shows up different. And then notice where your tailbone points. And then wag your tailbone a little bit. And then whatever way you like your tailbone pointing a little bit more, take 3 full breaths here. We are going to just drop the right hip to the ground to swing the left leg around. So we've opened up the whole time and closed down a little bit. So step your right foot outside of your left knee. Start to squeeze your thighs together. And then wrap your left elbow around your right knee and twist to bring your right hand behind your right hip. Continue to squeeze your inner thighs towards each other. Untwist. Cross your ankles and come back to downward facing dog or hands and knees. And explore either that bird dog variation with the leg or down dog. Twist first the leg in and out. And then keep the leg straight, stack, and square down, stack, and square down, stack, bend the knee, kick the heel towards the hip, and aim the tailbone up towards the knee, and then down towards the heel on the ground. Wag it a few times. And then bring your left knee behind your left wrist, ankle towards your right wrist. Slide the right leg back, whatever props you need to be able to explore the same thing. So first rotating your left leg bone open, so away from your midline. And then open the pelvis, open the book. And then wag your tail. Find what you like more. I'm still opposite. And take 3 full breaths. We're going to drop the left hip down to the floor to swing the right leg around. And then cross your left leg over your right knee. Foot on the floor. Start to squeeze the thighs together. Hug the left knee with your right elbow and twist. Continue to squeeze your thighs towards each other. And square forward. Take your block, place it between your upper thighs, and squeeze the block together. Maybe you walk your hands down your shins, coming into a forward fold, but the most important thing is to close it down. So squeeze the thighs towards the block, Feel the hip points kind of close in as well. We'll hold here for 3 breaths. Keep the block where it is, bend your knees. Continue to squeeze the block as you roll down onto your spine, onto your back. Squeeze the block, lift into a hip bridge. Continue to squeeze. And release the hips to the ground. Remove the block. Any movements that you need to allow yourself to be a little bit more comfortable with your legs straight, allow for that. And then come into our check-in position. Bring your mind back to where you started the practice. Check in from the feet, the legs, the hips, the low back, the spine. Maybe the idea of your balance beam. Noticing your asymmetries, the differences side to side. Are they the same? Or has anything shifted? I personally feel my entire lower body vibrating. I'm just kind of noticing that. And you are welcome to stay here as long as you would like. We have come to the end of the hour. So whenever you're ready, bend your knees. Roll to either side. And press yourself up. You might test your butterfly pose and just kind of notice if there's any shifts or changes. We all seem to know how close or far away our knees are to the floor. So maybe you notice a difference. Or maybe just in that cross-legged position, you notice a difference. So hopefully this brought some awareness to some interesting things in your hips and your pelvis. And hopefully the exploration of movement felt good to you. And you can bring these things into other movements throughout your day-to-day life and different practices, yoga, strength training like we did today. Just kind of knowing that there's never one right way to do anything, that we all are in different bodies. And this kind of gave you options to explore, to see what felt good in your own body. So thanks so much. I'll see you next.